It's 8 o'clock, and this is the UK Tonight. I'm Matt Barbet. Coming up, an alleged Chinese spy with links to Prince Andrew is finally revealed, and his name is Yang Tengbo. For days, the businessman with close links to the prince was kept anonymous after being barred from Britain. The security minister is now warning this case does not exist in a vacuum. And it comes as Sky News understands that Prince Andrew will now not be joining the rest of the royals at Sandringham for Christmas amid all these allegations. Tonight we'll take a look at how an alleged spy was able to form relationships at the heart of the British establishment, and we'll ask what sort of impact this will have on the UK's future relationship with China. Also this evening, Lucy Letby's lawyers call for a new appeal. The former nurse is serving 15 whole life sentences after being found guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 7 others. Her legal team now claim they have new evidence that undermines the convictions. Plus, a new crisis for the Church of England as the Archbishop of York faces calls to resign over his handling of a sex abuse case. And Battle of Britain. England's Lionesses will face Wales's Dragons in next year's Euros. All those stories to come and many more on the UK Tonight. Good evening, thanks for joining us. An alleged Chinese spy with close links to Prince Andrew has now been named as 50-year-old Yang Tengbo after a court lifted his anonymity. The businessman was banned from entering the UK and was reportedly a close confidant of the Duke of York. They were pictured with both David Cameron and Theresa May as well. And Mr. Yang said in a statement today that he'd done nothing wrong or unlawful. But it comes as Sky News understands that Prince Andrew and his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, will now not be joining the rest of the royal family for Christmas at Sandringham this year. We'll get more on that in a moment. But first, our home editor, Jason Farrell, has this.
Yang Tengbo is the alleged Chinese spy who befriended a prince, whilst being linked to an organisation whose aims are to disrupt the UK. His relationship with the Duke of York, on the face of it, promoted British and Chinese companies, but was described as having a covert and clandestine element, with Mr. Yang accused of engaging in deceptive activity for the Chinese Communist Party.
It's clear that Prince Andrew has, unbeknownst to himself perhaps, been a risk to our national security, and naming H6 will send a shudder down many people's spine, the people who are in our elite, who are at the heart of our government.
That's because Mr. Yang appeared to have penetrated the British establishment, meeting Prime Ministers Theresa May and David Cameron while running his consultancy called Hampton Group International. Here on China Central Television, he says he met Mr. Cameron at a Chinese New Year reception at number 10. Amid threats to name him in Parliament, Mr. Yang asked for the restrictions on his identity to be lifted, insisting he's not a spy, but a legitimate businessman. But MPs say he's one of many agents with an ulterior motive.
Yang Tengbo at H6 was in fact not a lone wolf. He was one of some 40,000 members of the United Works Department, which the Intelligence Security Committee report last year said, and I quote, "and known to government, had penetrated every sector of the UK economy, spying, stealing intellectual property, influencing and shaping our institutions."
Mr. Yang was born in China in 1974. In 2002, he came to the UK to study, including at the University of York. In 2013, he was granted indefinite leave to remain. And through his consultancy connections, by 2020, he was attending Prince Andrew's 60th birthday party. But in November 2021, he was stopped at a port under counter-terrorism laws and asked to hand over digital devices. As a result of that, in March 2023, the Home Secretary directed he should be excluded from the UK on national security grounds. Evidence on his devices revealed his strong links, both with the Communist Party and with the Duke of York.
Where individuals pose a threat, as you would expect, the UK government is absolutely committed to using the full range of powers available to disrupt them. I raised these issues when I was in Beijing a few weeks ago. This case does not exist, sadly, in a vacuum. The UK is the in the most complex threat environment that we've seen for a very significant time.
While Mr Yang has their pictures on his desk, both David Cameron and Theresa May say they don't know him and they've met thousands of people at numerous functions. But for Prince Andrew, whose aide told Mr Yang he was at the very top of the tree among his close confidants, this is harder to shake off. The Duke says nothing sensitive was discussed and he ceased contact when concerns were raised. But, disgraced again, he won't be attending Sandringham this Christmas. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, let's have a word with our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, about that last point that Jason made. He's going to be out in the cold again this Christmas.
Well, it's interesting because Christmas is annually that kind of time of year where we do see him in front of the cameras. It's often a one-off since he had to step away from public duties. But yeah, it seems that he has decided, alongside his ex-wife Sarah Ferguson, that this year they won't go. Now, why exactly he's made that decision, we don't know. Palace insiders think maybe he's done the honourable thing. Others are saying, well, he's maybe not going because actually his daughters aren't going because they're going to be with their in-laws instead. But there is no doubt that this has been hugely embarrassing for the royal family. Since Friday, I think really interest in this story has really erupted because of Prince Andrew's involvement. You can't forget the fascination, the interest in his downfall within the royal family, the way he had to step back from public duties because of his links with the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. I suspect him and his team would say, look, we're probably being unfairly targeted here because other members of the political establishment also spent time with this Chinese businessman. And once we were told to step back, then we did just that. When it comes to Christmas, though, I'm afraid there are still other questions, and it revolves around a lunch that's due to take place on Thursday, a royal family lunch. It's a private lunch, but it's happening at Buckingham Palace. And in some ways, that means it's a grey area. Palace insiders, in some ways, hoping that he again is going to do the honourable thing and decide not to go, because while it is a family occasion, and usually he's invited to those, the optics of him driving into the gates of Buckingham Palace do not look great at the moment. In terms of how the King is involved in all this, well, it's quite difficult to find out. All you'll be told is that actually there's still a warmth there between the two brothers, but I think for everyone involved, it's probably been decided that actually he is too much of a distraction this Christmas, especially after the year the royal family have had generally.
Indeed, Rhiannon. Well, I'm joined now as well by Charles Parton, a former UK diplomat who spent 22 years working in China. Charles, good to see you. This guy wasn't exactly James Bond. What do you think he might have been up to, though?
No, he wasn't, and the press continued to describe him as a spy, when, of course, spies work against the interests of their own countries, and it sounds as though Yang Tongbo was working very much for the interests of his country, China. But clearly there was an element of what one might say covert or coercive or corrupting business, which is the definition, I think, of what the United Front frequently gets up to, and sufficient for the Home Secretary to have ruled him out. So I do think while the issue has been somewhat overblown in terms of Prince Andrew, we might at least think of giving Prince Andrew a medal, because what he's managed to do is to raise this issue, an awareness of the issue, which is a very serious one actually, right to the top of the political agenda in a way that many MPs and those of us who've been worried about this question of Chinese interference in the UK haven't managed over the last 5 years. Prince Andrew has done it in the last 5 days.
Yes, medals are normally given out for intentional achievements, though, aren't they? That's the point.
Possibly, yes.
OK. Now, listen, tell me more. You mentioned the United Front there. That's the United Front Work Department of China, which sounds incredibly Orwellian. It's not MI6. It's not the CIA. What is it?
It's one of the 6 most important departments of the Chinese Communist Party, and it has a very long history. Mao himself described it as one of the 3 magic weapons for advancing the communist cause, along with the party and the People's Liberation Army. And it's become a bit of a bogeyman in our countries. I think what's most important is perhaps to understand its methodology. It's a little bit, in a sense, communist jargon, but what it does is identify the main enemy, which now that China is in a globalized world is the United States, and attempts by sometimes overt, but quite often covert and coercive and corrupting ways to detach those who are close to the United States and move them into a neutral position, and to move those who are already in a neutral position into a position which benefits China.
Were you on the receiving end of this kind of thing when you were working in China?
Not when I was working in China. I mean, subsequent to that, I was subject to an approach by the Minister of State Security, which is, as it were, the equivalent of the KGB. But that's an altogether different beast from the United Front, which basically aims to get those within a country to work on its behalf. Because by aligning some of their interests that may be pecuniary or flattering or whatever. I mean, I think there was one interesting piece in the judgment, for instance, where it seemed to suggest that Prince Andrew might set up or become the patron of a think tank. And that's precisely the sort of thing that the United Front likes to do, set up a think tank which can influence governments, but can influence them in a way that is aligned with China's interest, perhaps more than a completely free and independent, free-thinking think tank.
Charles, can we look at this from a slightly different point of view? This man, Yang Tengbo, says he's done nothing wrong. I suppose you could say he would say that, wouldn't he? But actually, in trying to seek a different point of view for China abroad, well, we do the same thing, don't we? When we have diplomats exerting soft power around the world, promoting Britain's interests. What's the difference?
I think we need to draw a line between influence, and you're right, that's perfectly acceptable diplomatic behaviour. I mean, it's called public diplomacy, and we all indulge in that. And interference, which an ex-Australian Prime Minister Turnbull described as I've said, covert, coercive, or corrupting. And that is the big difference, I think. It's the three C's, if you like.
Do you think there could be elements of, well, at the kinder end, a lack of understanding of China, the more serious end, xenophobia, or I guess you'd call it sinophobia here being directed towards China?
Well, I do think we've got to be balanced. I mean, we want good relations with China. Of course we do. I mean, trade's important, investment's important, providing it's in areas which we are happy with, because China, of course, its investment is aimed largely at getting hold of science and technology, which in these days of a difference between civil and military and repressive uses of technology is quite a worry. But of course, we want to work with China on global goods like health and climate change and AI governance, etc. But I do think that we really need to be a lot more aware of the dark side of China and protect our own interests and values far more energetically than we do. And there will, I'm afraid, be trade-offs between the need to protect ourselves and our economic and national security versus those good relations.
Chris Patten, the former governor of Hong Kong, the last British governor of Hong Kong, in fact, was speaking to my colleague Mark Austin early on, and highlighted the huge disparity between Chinese exports into the UK and Chinese investment in the UK. Very little of the latter. They want to sell us an awful lot of stuff, though. How much do we really need China as a trading partner right now?
Well, I mean, trade enriches both sides if it's carried out on a level playing field, and I think the complaints of both us and Europeans and Americans and others have been that it hasn't been on a level playing field. But Chris Patten's absolutely right, let me say, about the investment. I mean, we hear our ministers going around saying we badly need Chinese investment, but you have to ask yourself why. I mean, there are four basic reasons for investment. One, it brings jobs. Well, looking at the figures just before COVID, when investment was relatively high from China, the number of jobs created and maintained was 9,400 in 3 years, so about 3,000 jobs a year. Not great. Another reason for investment is you want technology, but it's not. We're not getting technology from China. It's going the other way. You might want management techniques. Again, we're not getting that. And you might want money, but again, the price of money is pretty cheap. And it needs to be put in perspective, because the entire, out of the whole stock of foreign investment in the UK, the percentage that comes from China is 0.3%. And when you hear people in the city saying, yes, but we really badly need China for our services and the profits we make from China, city profits, it's 0.4%.
So what we do, sorry to interrupt, Charles, what we do need, and certainly a lot of universities will say, is we need Chinese students. Yang Tengbo himself was a Chinese student who came into the UK a while ago. I think it was probably before fees, or maybe not the case for foreign students, but still there are many thousands of Chinese students here now studying. Do you think there's a possibility that some of those will be the next Yang Tengbo, or many of them will be?
Well, of course, some will be, and some will end up as intelligence officers, no doubt. But the world all over spies. Let's not get too excited about that, in the sense that there are also very good outcomes too. I mean, one hopes that people who study here understand a lot more about our values and systems, and get a liking for the UK as well. So there are pluses and minuses, and when it comes to the minuses, well, that's what things like the security service are for, to dig out these people, and in this case they appear to have been doing their job quite well.
Well, they may be watching the UK tonight, and we quite enjoy talking about spies, don't we? Look, final question, Charles. Where does our relationship as a country go with China from here on in?
Well, that's a very good question, because so far the government has not really given us any indication of what their China policy is. But as I said, we want to try and maximise the things that work for both sides. But I think we have to acknowledge that there is a lot of threat coming from China, and our first duty, as indeed the Labour government, I mean, David Lammy said in March 23, I think it was, in his speech at the Fabian Society, that national defence would be the #1 priority of this government. And I think when you're dealing with China, it has to be. So there will, of course, be tensions. And the other thing is that we will have to consider very carefully how we deal with China in relation to the Americans and the Europeans. Because we cannot, I think, be totally apart from our very close allies for a whole variety of reasons.
Yes, well, that is a whole other ball game to discuss. Charles, in the meantime, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Sky News.
Pleasure.
Lucy Letby's lawyers say they'll make a fresh bid to challenge her convictions on the grounds that one of the experts at her trial was not reliable. The former neonatal nurse is serving 15 whole life sentences after being found guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 7 others at the Countess of Chester Hospital. Her barrister, Mark MacDonald, said today he will seek permission to appeal, as our chief North of England correspondent, Greg Milam, explains.
The crimes of Lucy Letby marked her out as the most prolific serial killer in modern British history. But just as unusual is the loyal band of supporters who doubt those very convictions. Among them, her new legal team, who want judges to reopen her appeal, citing interviews in which the lead prosecution witness at her trial, Dr. Dowie Evans, said he'd revised his opinion on how some babies collapsed, if not on who was responsible.
This is not fresh evidence. This is the lead prosecution expert who has changed his mind, and the Court of Appeal may not have been told the accurate picture as a result.
Letby's serving life in prison for the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 7 others at the Countess of Chester Hospital. The families of the babies she attacked have in the past described discussions about her guilt as distressing and offensive. And police are still investigating the care of other babies Lucy Letby came into contact with during her career here and at Liverpool Women's Hospital. We know she's been questioned under caution in prison.
Page 24.
A public inquiry is looking at how Letby was able to kill, not whether she did. The consultant who first tried to raise the alarm about her said he believes she attacked more babies.
On reflection, I think it's likely that Letby didn't start becoming a killer in June 2015, or didn't start harming babies in June 15.
In a statement, the Crown Prosecution Service said 2 juries and 3 appeal court judges have reviewed a multitude of different strands of evidence against Lucy Letby. She's been convicted on 15 separate counts following 2 separate jury trials. In May, the Court of Appeal dismissed Letby's leave to appeal on all grounds, rejecting her argument that expert prosecution evidence was flawed. Letby's lawyers accept it would be unusual for the court to reopen her appeal, but we already know the Lucy Letby story is unprecedented in so many ways. Greg Milam, Sky News, Chester.
Still to come here on the UK Tonight. The Church of England crisis deepens as the Archbishop of York now faces calls to resign over his handling of a sex abuse case. Also ahead this evening, how much will water bills rise by? We'll take a look with our business correspondent Paul Kelso ahead of the regulator's decision later on this week. And we'll have more on the warnings from the Crown Prosecution Service that radical action is needed to reform our justice system.
Big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent.
You are not getting in this elevator, okay?
The judge made it very clear that she could see no justifiable reason why Sakulas wasn't here facing British justice.
I promised I would get him justice.
Free, wherever you get your news.
This is what they're up against. The wind is the really big problem. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? This is the exact spot in Nottingham where their 19-year-old son, Barnaby Webber, lost his life.
I just think it's so cruel and so harsh.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
Sky News gets the full story first. Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. It's legal to let go. Set the speed and take the hands off. It's almost driverless, but not quite. Hans is a highly trained police dog. The force is incredible. It's really frightening, actually. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid. And this is what's left of it.
Dense, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Now, the Archbishop of York has defended his handling of a sex abuse case within the Church of England as he continues to face calls to resign. Stephen Cottrell has hit out at media reports, claiming he failed to take enough action against the priest David Tudor and insisted that he acted immediately on the allegations. Mr Cottrell is due to temporarily take over from the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, who's stepping down in January over his failures in handling a separate sex abuse case in the church. Sky's Shingi Mararike explains.
This is usually a time of year for the church to celebrate, and at this special Advent service in York Minster, they are in a festive mood.
This wonderful and beautiful celebration of Christmas.
But beyond the joys of the season, Christmas is being marked by what could become a crisis for the Church of England. Because the Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, the man due to take on the biggest role in the institution, is facing calls to resign over reports about his handling of sex abuse by a priest who served under him. In a statement today, Cottrell offered an apology and more context, stating, In my capacity as Bishop of Chelmsford, I suspended David Tudor from office at the first opportunity when a new victim came forward to the police in 2019. Up until 2019, there were no legal grounds to take alternative action. I am deeply sorry that we were not able to take action earlier, but this was the situation I inherited. It is extremely disappointing that this story is being reported as if it was an abuser, being ignored or even protected. Actually, nothing could be further from the truth. Matthew says he was a victim of abuse at the hands of a vicar when he was a teenager. He thinks Cottrell must resign.
We shouldn't have to wait for him to resign. He should be removed and take with him all the other bishops and church hierarchy who have caused this safeguarding mess and hurt to so many victims. Abuse could have been stopped if they'd have acted. You know, rapists, abusers would have been stopped in their tracks. They weren't, and they were allowed to carry on.
Within the church, criticism as well. This bishop, its own deputy head of safeguarding, stating much more needs to be done.
If I look at the institution, I can see issues around lack of accountability. I can see systems that don't operate like they would in other organisations. So the way in which clergy are appointed as office holders, not employees, and the laws and rules that we have around imposing clergy discipline are not really fit for purpose.
The calls for Stephen Cottrell to resign aren't just about safeguarding issues in the church. They go beyond it. In a society that is becoming increasingly less religious, this will add to people's criticisms of the church as an institution. But the context matters. A month on from one Archbishop of Canterbury resigning in similar circumstances, pressure is mounting on the man due to take over in just a matter of days. And for some, apologies will not be enough. They'll want to see changes made to an old institution that is meant to be a source of hope and light. Shingi Marike, Sky News, York.
With me now in the studio is the Chair of Women and the Church, Reverend Martine Oborne. Martine, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
Let's talk about the wider issue in a second around the church, and certainly, as the Bishop of Birkenhead alluded to there, the difficulties with the organisation, especially when it comes to how women might progress through it. But first and foremost, on this issue in particular, it's a complicated one, but it's a mess.
It is a mess. I mean, I have to say that, the church does do a lot of good work. And, at this time, at Christmas, there are clergy all over the country working very hard and doing a lot of very good things. But as an institution, there are some serious failings that need to be addressed.
Do you think it is the system, the institution that the now Archbishop of York was trying to operate in that caused the problems? Or could he have done more sooner about this priest?
I think he could have done more sooner.
Yeah, because, I mean, you look at it as an outsider, as many people are looking at this, and he carried on doing things, being in close proximity to families, to children, when there have been these allegations swirling around this man for years around impropriety and worse with girls who are underage.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's reasonable for people to expect a minister not to have a history of abusing young girls. And, the fact that he wasn't allowed to go near children or into schools, it's not satisfactory that seems to have been the arrangement.
Do you think Stephen Cottrell should resign? Do you think he should even temporarily be the Archbishop of Canterbury?
Well, I think it should become standard within the institution now that if you are found to have fallen short of safeguarding judgments, then you should step back, yes. I think people have the right to expect the church to be a safe place, and it largely is. So we have to be really ruthless in making change.
But is it a safe place by design or just by chance?
Well, it could be safer by addressing some of the cultural problems that we have. And one of the issues is that it's a very hierarchical, deferential institution. And so it's extremely difficult to speak out and criticise from within. So I would say that we do see, sadly, sometimes coercion and gaslighting of people who do have the courage to speak out. It can be really hard to speak out about concerns.
Yes. Well, one of those people who's done that, one of those women who's done that, is the Bishop of Newcastle, Helen Ann Hartley. She was the one calling for the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, to stand down, said he wouldn't, then he did, because of his handling of a sexual abuse case involving another person, of course. She's been the one calling for the Archbishop of York to do the same. And it certainly sounds like she has been ostracised. No one else at that level, bishop level, is piping up. And so that describes everything you're talking about, the gaslighting. If this was in any other modern organisation, a senior woman executive being gaslighted for calling out wrongdoing, it wouldn't be allowed to stand, would it?
Well, it's very disappointing, and I hugely admire the courage of the Bishop of Newcastle for speaking out very bravely. I'm sure there are many who do support her position, but as I say, it can be very difficult.
What are they scared? Are people scared of speaking out?
People are scared. I mean, the area I know about most of all is discrimination against women in the church, which is an institutional issue. I mean, it's still possible to discriminate. Say you want a male vicar or male bishop.
Yes.
You still teach that women need to be under the authority of men. All these issues, and it's very hard to even criticise something like that. It's very hard to be a feminist in the church because you will be marginalised if you make these kind of criticisms. So I think it is very difficult for people to speak out when they're concerned about some things.
But Martin, let's just dig into that a little bit. It's very difficult to be, as you say, a woman in the church. Your badge says not equal yet. You know, you have to sign up to be part of an organisation that you have to sign up to the idea that people can say, actually, we don't want you because you're a woman, we want a man to be taking our services. You have to agree with that to even be let through the door, effectively. I mean, the church's issues with sexuality are there as well. How incompatible can one place be with wider modern society?
Yeah, I would agree, but also incompatible with the Christian faith.
Yeah.
And, you know, the gospel and all that Jesus taught about a world where the first is last, the last is first, that we don't have these elite groups of one group privileging itself over another. So it's not only unjust, it's untrue to the faith, and also I would say it's unsafe because it creates a culture where people are silenced and afraid to speak about their experiences. I mean, watch my campaign group. We were at we did a Christian festival in the summer, and we put together this thing we called the Quilt of Rage. And we encourage people to write down their stories, women to write down their stories of experiences they've had in the church. And really, many of them very, very shocking. But no one wants to know about this. And a lot of work has been done trying to gather together evidence of women and the abuse and bullying and harassment that they often receive, the microaggressions. But it's very hard to get that taken seriously and anything done about it. I mean, at that particular festival where we will ask people to do these things, there was a very nice male archdeacon who came along and said, oh, I'd like to write a square. And I said, that's great. And he said, but can I dictate it to you? Because I'm afraid someone might recognise my handwriting.
Wow. Wow.
I mean,
that's a shame,
if
isn't
a
it?
male archdeacon
is
too scared to write on a little anonymous thing at a festival, it just shows the level of fear there is in stepping out of line.
And people would be watching this feeling afraid about how it challenges their faith, their belief, which, of course, is an intensely personal thing. There'll be plenty of others, of course, who don't care one jot, and they'll see next week's celebrations as entirely secular and about giving presents and spending time with family. Is there a risk, though, at this most important Christian festival that you're losing the chance to engage with people and they are only going to see Christmas as a time for themselves, for family, and they're not going to think about where it came from in the first place?
Well, I mean, I think Christmas is a wonderful opportunity for the church to do what it does so well, which is to be there and to support and encourage all people, and particularly those most in need. And as I said before, I think it does this extremely well. And there's just so many people, not just clergy, but lay people in churches all over the country doing just amazing work. And that is totally true to the gospel and true to everything that Jesus taught and showed with the example of his life. Sadly, we are human and we are all sinful. We do make mistakes, and so there are problems in how we, I suppose how we admit to that, those failings. And really, I just think we need to be a bit more courageous about accepting when we get things wrong and doing something about it.
Martin, appreciate you coming in. Have a good Christmas.
Thank you.
Still to come here on the UK Tonight, we'll hear from the Chief Inspector of the Crown Prosecution Services. He says radical action is needed to get the justice system moving again. Welcome back. The Chief Inspector of the Crown Prosecution Service has told us here at Sky News that radical action is now needed to overhaul the justice system, with the Crown Court backlog in England and Wales at a record high. Anthony Rogers says removing the right to trial by jury and then introducing intermediate courts may be the only way to bring that waiting list down, as Sky's Ashna Huranag reports now.
A substantial sentence of imprisonment is inevitable in cases such as this.
Getting justice took Vicky Crawford almost 6 years. She reported historical sexual abuse in 2018, but the trial only went ahead in March this year after being delayed 6 times.
With every hearing, like every court date, I was nervous and anxious. I had a headache, felt sick, couldn't sleep. The run up to it was awful. I had nightmares, panic attacks in the middle of the night. I'd wake up having panic attacks. Just couldn't eat. Just felt awful.
The waiting for your day in court can be as distressing as the crime itself. It is why Vicky wants to share her story.
The reason I'm waiving my anonymity is because there are thousands of people just like me, look like me, talk like me, think like me, have the same experiences that I'm having in the court system, but nobody puts a face to those people. So this is me.
A system that the Chief Inspector of the Crown Prosecution Service watchdog says is under unprecedented strain, and only bold action will break the backlog.
The Crown Prosecution Service are under the greatest pressure I've ever seen in 25 years of the existence of the Inspectorate. And actually the thing that worries me more is I can't see an end to it. I can only see an increasing backlog. So something has to happen, but that something has to probably be radical.
What does a radical look like? You mentioned radical solutions.
Radical could be anything from removing the right of election to jury trial. It could be looking at an intermediate court between the Magistrates' Court and the Crown Court. You know, radical could literally mean changing the way that we look at the criminal justice system.
And reform like this isn't off the table, as the government considers a justice overhaul being led by former High Court Judge Sir Brian Leveson. In a once-in-a-generation review of the court system in England and Wales, offences could be reclassified and moved to the magistrates' courts. When offences are too serious for the magistrates but not serious enough for Crown courts like this one, we could see the introduction of new intermediate courts made up of a judge and magistrates. It may mean an end to jury trials for some offences, a solution the Chief Inspector would support.
If you did that and took out 20 or 30,000 cases out of a backlog and there still has to be a court, but you could start moving cases and having a simplest cases magistrate court, more serious cases with probably a judge and 2 lay members in an intermediate court, and then Crown Court reserved for the more serious offences, rape, murder, manslaughter, the terrorism. That is radical. That would solve the problem.
A drastic shake-up of the system that for many can't come soon enough. But to resolve it, they may need to be radical. Ashna Huranag, Sky News.
Well, now, you may already think you're paying enough for your water, and you may be well aware that many of our rivers, in fact, most of them are not that clean. But even so, this week, the water regulator will issue its verdict on how much more companies will be able to raise their bills by for the next 5 years. Despite those performance issues, water firms have asked Ofwat to grant steep hikes in the bills we all pay, as our business correspondent Paul Kelso explains.
This is a crucial week for the water industry. On Thursday, regulator Ofwat will say how much bills can go up by, and that matters not just to customers, but to companies, many of whom are in trouble. To understand why, let's go back to the beginning. It's 1989, and the water companies are privatised with zero debt, but have never intended to stay that way. The plan was for private investment and borrowing to fund improvements, so the state didn't have to, and the water companies have been good on their word. £70 billion of debt piled on. They will say the problem isn't how much, it's whether they can afford it and what they do with it. So what have the water companies done? Well, first of all, they funded investments in infrastructure between £4 and £9 billion, a record last year, a total in today's money, £210 billion. But they were also funding payouts to shareholders, £83 billion worth that many people find offensive. But it's part of the plan, deliberate. Investors won't put money in unless they get something out. But it's become harder to defend when we look at this, the dirty secret of the water industry, sewage spills. Sewage outflows, they're caused by these pipes where sewage and rainwater share the pipe. When they overflow, they go into rivers instead of our homes. For decades, the industry didn't even know how often it happened. We know it was more than 450,000 times last year. That has become politically and practically toxic, but it's very, very expensive to fix. And like everything else, the only way the water company can do anything about it is by borrowing. But the cost of borrowing is rising. This chart shows the purple line's water industry cost of borrowing against an index of UK corporate borrowings. You can see the cost for everybody went up as the inflation spike happened, but water was cheaper. The purple line's below the white line. People like water. It was reliable and dull. But look what happens in the summer last year. The lines cross over, the true state of Thames Water finances emerges, and water has got more expensive ever since, which means it is costing more and more for them to borrow. Look at this, Thames Water's, after a bridging loan, £3 billion, they're going to pay almost 10%, hundreds of millions of pounds in interest and fees, which means only one thing. At Thames and everywhere else, customer bills are going to rise. Now, this chart is actually one of the more benign in water. It's customer bills over time in real terms, pretty flat. What we're paying at the moment is actually lower than a decade ago. Now, in the summer, Ofwat said bills could rise by 22%. The industry is asking for 40%. And wherever Ofwat draws its line, we are guaranteed to be paying more, and investors are guaranteed to be allowed a higher take from the industry. As long as we've got a privatised system, that's the reality.
Coming up here on the UK Tonight still, why your Brussels sprouts are apparently going to be bigger, maybe better, if you like them, this Christmas. And Serena Wiegmann knows who her England side will face in the group stages of Euro 2025. News next of a very interesting draw with the neighbours for the defending champions.
First Minister, how are you?
Good morning. Good morning.
Nice to see you. How are you feeling?
Looking forward to getting into the parliamentary chamber.
Are you any further forward to making a decision?
No, it's an important day today.
All of the claims were in line with my parliamentary duties, so I'm making that clear to you, Conor.
He was a Scot through and through.
He was a very good politician.
Alex Salmond was controversial, he was a disruptor, but above all, he was respected.
Will you resign if you lose this week?
Again, I'm not planning to, of course, lose the vote of no confidence. I'm planning to win that vote of no confidence.
His face said it all.
My intention to stand down as party leader.
This is now a storm with deadly consequences. How are they feeling?
They're a bit scared at the minute.
We've been told to evacuate.
How are you feeling?
Devastated.
Hundreds of homes were wiped out by flooding. I'm Conor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent.
It was probably the darkest time in my life.
Scott is 5 years sober after a cocaine addiction left him close to death.
Scotland has a shameful record. Worse than England, the worst in Europe. Why not just say you've failed? Because then you might get more respect from families who've lost loved ones.
This is where one of the UK's most prolific rapists thought he'd got away with murder.
Sky News can reveal that former sex workers had told police he was sexually violent.
My Emma.
Free wherever you get your news. It's over, isn't it?
The Americans say he is Rossi, a fraudster.
This has been one of the most bizarre cases ever heard in a courtroom in this country.
A dangerous murderer.
Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Andrew Ennis after this?
She said she can forgive him, but as long as he's behind bars.
By doing the right thing, it's destroyed your life.
They terrorised me. They intimidated me.
Sky News, the full story first.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Welcome back. We're going to chat sport now. Rob, I thought we were going to talk sprouts, but you don't want to talk about that, Rob, do you? You want to talk about sports. Sports, not sprouts. Let's talk about the draw for the Women's Euros, which are next year. And it is an almighty Battle of Britain clash between England and Wales.
Yeah, the defending champions, England and Wales, playing in a major tournament for the first time, and a difficult group for both because 3 of the world's top 11 nations all in Group D together, England, the Netherlands and France alongside Wales. So it'll be difficult for, well, any of those 2 teams to get out of it, you would say. But it was really interesting hearing Wales' Jess Fishlock, one of their best players, talking about that she had a smile on her face ever since they qualified. As I said, first time they've ever been there. It might be one that they will look to go and enjoy it and take on the experience of it rather than expecting to be in at the sharp end and lifting the trophy at the end of it.
Look, as any rugby union fan will tell you, any football fan, when those sides have faced each other, the form kind of goes out of the window. It's a big clash, isn't it? Those big neighbours, and it's the Dragons against the Lionesses. So, you know, maybe Wales can put it out of the bag.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I remember back to Euro 2016, England played Wales in the group stage, and it took a really late goal. I think it was from Jamie Vardy or Daniel Sturridge. They both scored in that game, but to win it. But it was Wales who went further in the competition. Wales got to the semi-finals. Brilliant performance. As for England, they were dumped out by Iceland. So we'll hope that the English amongst us will hope that's not a sign for the Lionesses as they look to defend their title. But who knows? Maybe Wales can. I think you're being the optimist there, aren't you, Matt?
A little bit optimistic. Look, I think it's great, though. I think it's great they've been drawn together. But like you say, the other teams are no slouches either. So that's the real problem for both sides, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly for England, because England have played both the Netherlands and France recently. In Netherlands was Nations League games, France was qualifiers, and on both occasions they won one and lost one of those 2 matches. So it would take something incredible for Wales to get themselves into the knockout stages. They are the lowest team left or ranked in the competition, and then you would say it is 2 from 3 from England, Netherlands and France as to who can go on into the quarterfinals. But that is a long way off into the distance. Lots of sport to keep you across tonight as well.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
I think it's a human quality that some people are destined with their own determination.
I think that the player compared to me, I think that they have much more responsibility.
I do think there's a responsibility within the game to prepare the lads for how hard it's going to be.
I started my investigation into academy football by finding out how the game's top managers get the best out of the young players. But only 9% of our academy players will ever play a professional game. Coming up in this episode, we find out how the best become the best.
You don't just get it handed to you, you're aware.
There has to be a fallback.
Chelsea Academy, that's all I've known.
Mentally, I think I've always been quite strong.
In the history of the game, almost 1,300 people have had the ultimate honour of wearing an England shirt. They climbed the mountain, made it to the very top. So what does that journey look like? The journey to become an elite footballer?
It's just what I love doing. It's the only thing that I loved growing up. There was no alternative for me.
You got the big break at the age of 6.
Yeah.
It's an extraordinary story.
It was just like a half-term camp that the academy was doing. They'd sent invites to a few schools in the community, and luckily it was one of my schools was one of them. As you can imagine, every hand in the class went up. So.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Thank you, Rob. Staying with Sky Sprouts news now, and love them or loathe them, Brussels sprouts are a staple of your Christmas roast. You have to have them, don't you? This year, there will be even more to go around, and that's because supermarkets are saying that strong growing conditions mean sprouts could be a whopping 25% larger this year than last. Some of you will be very worried about that, I'm sure. Let's get more now from one of the UK's largest sprout producers. That means they produce more sprouts. You're not just large, are you, John? John Inglis, who is a senior commercial manager at ESG Drysdale. Good to see you. Why are they getting bigger?
I think we're looking at a backdrop of a really tricky couple seasons for UK winter veg. We've had abnormal heat waves and sort of record-breaking rainfall, and these sorts of conditions have sort of slowed down crop growth, and it's been a really challenging time for UK producers, resulting in some lower yielding and ultimately some smaller crop. I think even if you were to look at this time last year, you know, we had downpours and -10 temperatures, so. Anything was a bit of an improvement on that, let's say.
So this is good news, because I thought a big sprout was just a cabbage, but clearly I'm wrong.
No, slightly different crops. We've had some much more favourable conditions this year. We had the right amount of warmth and sunshine over the summer, even in Scotland, believe it or not. We've had some good amounts of rainfall in the autumn, and even December, it's been a nice cold, cooler temperatures, but not too cold.
It was news to me that you grow lots of different varieties of sprouts, don't you? So which are the whoppers, and what are the other varieties there for?
That's right, yeah. So winter produce, and I guess sprouts in particular, they're all sort of planted at a similar sort of period in the spring, and it's mainly varieties and growing conditions and plant spacings which sort of bring the crop on throughout the winter period. So yeah, you have your traditional varieties like Doric, which I think everyone will relate to, those sort of bitter and the ones that your grandma boiled to death.
Don't like those.
Sort of
I don't like those. No. What's your favourite then? What are the nicer ones to have?
I don't know. We've got some really nice Brecon and Hector in the mix at the moment.
Hector? I like the sound of that.
Yeah, so, really great tasting.
Are they all getting bigger then, John, because of the good crop?
Yeah, I think it's just, like I say, favourable conditions this year, teamed up with a bit of varietal development. So we've got some new varieties coming through, which are really fantastic, a lot hardier and a lot bolder, and I guess more importantly, greater tasting as well.
Oh, you're talking my language now, because, you know, I think a lot of us grew up on those sprouts that were boiled to death and they were bitter as anything. Listen, I know a sprout isn't just for Christmas, it's for life. Do you eat them all year round? Do you sell them all year round? And is this bumper crop going to be great for business?
Yeah, so we're a 12-month brassica operation, so we do some broccoli and cauliflower and stuff like that over the summer months. But the sprout season kicks off in August and runs all the way through till April in a traditional year. So during August, quite particular to a bit of sprout slaw or something like that.
Sprout slaw, okay. Just very quickly, yeah. When you have your Christmas, I had sprouts today, cut in half, small ones, pan-fried, bit of pancetta, delicious. How do you do yours at Christmas very quickly?
I think halved and roasted with a bit of garlic and a bit of bacon would be fantastic.
Great. I'll be round about midday. Lunch at 1, sound good?
Absolutely. I'll see you there.
See you there. Just a lunch of sprouts, obviously. John, thank you very much indeed. Good to see you.
Thanks.
Let's have a very quick look at the weather. Is it good for sprouts? Well, it's going to be mild but unsettled over the next few days with heavy rain and strong winds at times. They'll be mostly fine evening tonight and the wind will be easing, but northern Scotland will be seeing a bit more rain, so maybe good for next year's crop. That's all from the UK Tonight. You can catch up on all the highlights on our webpage. Just scan the QR code that's going to pop up on your screen. The World is with Gillian Joseph next.
Conflict. They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.